It was just another Wednesday night. I'd worked late, slogging through endless spreadsheets at the office. By the time I got home, the city outside my tiny apartment was already dark and quiet, save for the occasional car horn or the hum of someone's TV through the paper-thin walls. I kicked off my shoes, dropped my bag by the couch, and turned on the kettle. A cup of chamomile tea before bed was my ritual. It was the only way I could unwind after the grind of the day. As I sat on the couch scrolling through my phone, I noticed the faint sound of muffled talking. At first, I thought it was my neighbor's TV. I even rolled my eyes because they had a habit of watching reality shows at full volume. But this was different. The sound wasn't coming from the walls. It was softer, almost like it was inside the apartment. I paused my scrolling and strained my ears. Nothing. Maybe I was just overtired. I shrugged it off, finished my tea, and headed to bed. My bedroom window faced the alleyway, and I could hear the usual city noise. A car passing, the wind rattling a trash bin. I turned off the light, wrapped myself in my blanket, and closed my eyes. That's when I heard the phone ring. It wasn't my cell phone. It was my landline. Yeah, I still had one of those because my building's buzzer system only worked through it. The thing barely rang once a month, and usually only if I was getting a package. I glanced at the glowing clock on my nightstand, 12:43 a.m. My stomach sank. Who the hell calls at this hour? I got out of bed and padded into the living room. The phone was still ringing, the shrill tone breaking the silence of the apartment. I hesitated before picking it up. What if it was an emergency? A family member? I grabbed the receiver and brought it to my ear. Hello? Nothing. Just static. Hello? I repeated, louder this time. Through the crackling line, I thought I heard something. A voice? It was faint, almost a whisper, but I couldn't make out the words. Who is this? I asked, my voice shaking slightly. The static grew louder, and then I heard it clearly, a single word. Help. I froze. My grip on the phone tightened. Who is this? What do you want? But the line went dead. I stood there for a moment, staring at the receiver in my hand. My heart was pounding in my chest. Maybe it was a prank? Some drunk idiot dialing random numbers? That had to be it. I put the phone back in its cradle and stood there, waiting to see if it would ring again. It didn't. I told myself it was nothing, just some random weirdness, and went back to bed. But it took me hours to fall asleep. The next day, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. Work was a blur, and I kept replaying the call in my head. Who had called? Why? By the time I got home, I was determined to forget about it. I made dinner, watched some Netflix, and tried to relax. But as the evening wore on, I started noticing small things. The air in the apartment felt colder than usual, even though the thermostat was set to the same temperature. I thought I heard footsteps above me, but the tenant upstairs had moved out weeks ago. And then there was the sound of the landline's dial tone, faint but persistent, like someone had left the phone slightly off the hook. I checked the receiver. It was properly hung up. Around midnight, I was brushing my teeth when I heard a noise outside the bathroom window. My apartment is on the 3rd floor, so I wasn't used to hearing much from the alley below. But this was loud, like something heavy being dragged across concrete. I turned off the faucet and pressed my ear to the glass. The noise stopped. My heart was pounding again, but I told myself it was probably a raccoon or a stray cat rummaging through the trash. Still, I couldn't stop myself from peeking out the window. The alley was dark, lit only by a single flickering streetlight. At first, I didn't see anything unusual. But then, in the far corner where the light didn't quite reach, I noticed movement. A figure, tall and shadowy, standing perfectly still. It was facing away from me, its head slightly tilted like it was listening to something. I yanked the curtain shut and backed away from the window. My mind raced. Was it just some random person? A homeless guy? But why would they be standing so still in the middle of the night? I grabbed my cell phone and dialed 911, but before I could hit call, the landline rang again. The sound made me jump so badly I nearly dropped my phone. I didn't want to answer it, but the ringing wouldn't stop. I forced myself to walk into the living room and pick it up. "Hello?" I said, my voice trembling. The static was back, louder this time. And then the voice. "You didn't help." My blood ran cold. "Who are you? What do you want from me?" The voice didn't answer, but the static started to change. It sounded like whispering, dozens of voices overlapping, growing louder and louder until it was almost deafening. I slammed the receiver down, my hands shaking. I wanted to leave the apartment, to get as far away as possible, but when I went to the front door, I couldn't bring myself to open it. Something told me I wasn't safe outside, either. I spent the rest of the night sitting on my couch, clutching a kitchen knife, and staring at the phone. It didn't ring again, but I could still hear faint whispers coming from the receiver. By morning, the noises stopped. I told myself it was over, that I'd imagined the whole thing. But when I left for work, I glanced into the alley. The streetlight was still flickering, and in the dim light, I saw something etched into the pavement. A single word, scratched deep into the concrete. "Help." I've lived in the same apartment building for about 5 years. It's nothing fancy, just a mid-sized complex with 12 floors, but the rent is decent, and it's close to my job. The building has this old, rickety elevator that's notorious for breaking down. Honestly, most of us just take the stairs, but after a long day at work, the last thing I wanted to do was climb 7 flights. That night was no different. I got home around 9 p.m., utterly drained. The lobby was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like even sound was too tired to hang around. I hit the button for the elevator and waited. The doors opened with a dull chime, and I stepped in, pressing the button for the 7th floor. The elevator gave its usual lurch before the doors slid shut. I leaned back against the wall and closed my eyes. For the first few seconds, everything was normal. I heard the familiar hum of the motor as we ascended. Then it stopped. Not abruptly, not like the power had cut out. It just slowed to a stop, the kind of gentle halt you'd expect when reaching your floor. But the floor indicator on the panel didn't light up. It still showed 4. I hit the button for 7 again. Nothing. I tried pressing the door open button, but the doors didn't budge. "Great," I muttered, assuming the elevator had decided to malfunction again. I fished my phone out of my bag to call the building manager, but of course, I had no service. Typical. I sighed, trying to stay calm. This wasn't the first time I'd been stuck in an elevator, and I figured it wouldn't be long before someone noticed. But then I realized something was off. The hum of the elevator motor was gone. The entire space was silent, unnaturally so. Even in a stopped elevator, you usually hear something. Faint creaks, distant noise from the building, anything. But this? Nothing. It was like the air itself had been sucked out. I tried the emergency phone in the panel. When I picked it up, there was no dial tone, just silence. My stomach started to knot. That's when the lights flickered. It was just for a moment, but in that brief flash, I thought I saw something in the mirrored wall of the elevator. A shadow? A figure? I spun around, my heart racing, but the elevator was empty. Just me. I laughed nervously, trying to shake off the growing unease. "You're just tired," I whispered to myself. "It's your mind playing tricks." But then I saw the panel. The floor indicator had changed. It now showed 1. That didn't make sense. The elevator hadn't moved. I hadn't felt it move. And even if it had, I hadn't pressed the button for the 1st floor. I jabbed the button for 7 again, harder this time. Still nothing. The lights flickered again, and the elevator jolted slightly, as if something heavy had shifted inside. My skin prickled. I looked around, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. But then I noticed something else. The air felt different, thicker, colder, like stepping into a freezer. The floor indicator blinked, and the numbers started to change. Slowly at first, then faster. 2, 3, 4, but the elevator wasn't moving. I was sure of it. The lights flickered again, and this time, I swear I heard something. A low, guttural sound, like a distant growl. I started pressing every button on the panel, desperate for the doors to open, for the elevator to do anything other than what it was doing. But nothing worked. The floor indicator kept climbing. 5, 6, 7. I braced myself, hoping the doors would open on my floor, but they didn't. The numbers kept going. 8, 9, 10. My breath hitched as the lights flickered again. This time, they stayed off for several long seconds. In the darkness, I felt it, a presence. It was subtle at first, like someone standing just behind me, barely out of reach. Then came the sound. Faint breathing, shallow and uneven, as if someone, or something, was struggling to catch their breath. When the lights came back on, I was alone. At least, I thought I was. The floor indicator now showed B. Basement. I hadn't pressed the button for the basement. Hell, I didn't even know if the basement elevator access still worked. Maintenance always kept it locked. My pulse was pounding in my ears as the elevator shuddered slightly. The air was freezing now, and my breath came out in faint white puffs. The lights flickered once more, and the doors opened. The hallway beyond was pitch black, the kind of black that swallows light. I couldn't see a thing, but I could hear it. Faint footsteps, echoing softly as if coming closer. My legs felt like lead, but I forced myself to move, slamming my hand against the door close button. The doors didn't budge. The footsteps grew louder. Close. I screamed, hammering the button. Just as the sound reached the threshold, the doors slid shut with a groan. The elevator jolted violently, throwing me to the floor. I scrambled to my feet, clutching the wall for support. The floor indicator was blinking erratically now, numbers flashing in no particular order. 7, 3, B, 12. It didn't make sense. None of this made sense. The elevator stopped again, this time with a finality that made my stomach drop. The lights flickered one last time and went out completely. In the suffocating darkness, I felt it again. The presence. This time, it was close. Too close. My breath caught as I felt cold air brush the back of my neck, like someone leaning in to whisper. And then, just as suddenly, the elevator started moving again. The lights came back on. The floor indicator read 7. The doors slid open to my floor. Everything looked normal. The familiar hallway, the faint hum of a TV from one of the apartments. I stumbled out, my legs shaking, and turned around. The elevator doors were still open. Inside, I saw my reflection in the mirrored wall. Except it wasn't me. The reflection smiled. I live in one of those cookie-cutter suburban neighborhoods where everything looks the same. Rows of identical houses, a small park in the center, and a grocery store a short walk away. It's quiet, almost boring, but I liked it. Safe, predictable, or at least, I thought so. The grocery store had a parking lot that was always half empty, especially late at night. I don't usually shop that late, but I'd been working late and realized I didn't have anything for breakfast. So, I grabbed my keys and headed out. The store was nearly deserted. Just a bored-looking cashier scrolling on her phone and a man in the frozen food aisle. I grabbed a few essentials, milk, eggs, coffee, and headed to the self-checkout. It was almost 11 p.m. by the time I finished and stepped back into the parking lot. That's when I noticed it. The first thing that struck me was how quiet it was. Normally, you'd hear something, cars passing by on the main road, the buzz of the store's fluorescent lights. But the lot was dead silent, like the world had hit mute. Even the air felt heavy, like a storm was coming, though the sky was clear. I started walking to my car, my sneakers crunching against the asphalt. My car was parked near the edge of the lot, under one of the streetlights. It was the only one lit. The others were flickering or completely dark. I remember thinking the city really needed to replace those bulbs. Then I saw it, a shape, crouched by the dumpster at the far corner of the lot. It was too dark to make out details, just the outline of something hunched over, its movements jerky, almost insect-like. I stopped in my tracks, my keys clutched tightly in my hand. At first, I thought it was a stray dog or a raccoon, but it was too big, too human-shaped. I told myself not to be stupid. It was probably just a homeless person rummaging for food. I took a deep breath and kept walking toward my car, refusing to look back at the dumpster. But as I approached my car, I heard it. A soft, scraping sound, like nails dragging against concrete. I froze, my hand on the car door. The sound stopped. Slowly, I turned my head, and my stomach dropped. The figure was standing now, halfway between the dumpster and me. It was tall, unnaturally so, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. Its head was cocked to one side, like it was studying me. Even under the dim light, I could tell its skin was pale, almost gray, and stretched tight over its bones. I didn't wait to see more. I yanked the car door open, jumped in, and locked it. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely get the key into the ignition. As the engine roared to life, I glanced out the window. It was closer. I don't even remember shifting into drive. All I know is I floored it, tearing out of the parking lot like my life depended on it. My heart was racing, my eyes darting between the road and the rearview mirror. For a moment, I thought I was safe. The lot disappeared behind me, and the quiet streets of my neighborhood came into view. But then I saw it. At first, it was just a shadow flickering under the streetlights, moving faster than anything had a right to. I slammed my foot on the gas, the engine whining in protest as I sped down the narrow suburban streets. But no matter how fast I went, the shadow stayed with me, darting between parked cars and leaping over fences. I turned sharply onto my street, tires squealing. My house was at the end of the block, and I prayed I could make it inside before it caught up. I skidded into my driveway, barely stopping before throwing the car into park. I didn't even bother locking the car. I sprinted to my front door, fumbling with my keys. My hands were trembling so much that I dropped them. As I bent to pick them up, I heard it, the soft thud of something landing on the pavement behind me. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I grabbed the keys, jammed the right one into the lock, and shoved the door open. I slammed it shut behind me, bolting the deadlock and sliding the chain into place. For a moment, I just stood there, back pressed against the door, gasping for air. The house was silent. No scraping sounds, no heavy breathing, nothing. I peered through the peephole, half expecting to see that thing standing on my porch. But the driveway was empty. The street was still. I almost laughed. Maybe it hadn't followed me after all. Maybe I just imagined the whole thing. Then I heard it. A soft, deliberate tap-tap-tap on the living room window. My blood ran cold. I turned slowly, my eyes fixed on the curtains. The tapping came again, louder this time. I backed away, my breath caught in my throat. The curtains were drawn, but I could see the faint outline of something pressed against the glass, tall, thin, impossibly still. The tapping stopped. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, the voice. "Let me in," it said, low and raspy, like whined through dead leaves. I bolted up the stairs, locking myself in my bedroom. I grabbed my phone and called 911, my voice shaking as I explained what was happening. The operator stayed on the line until the police arrived. When they searched the property, they didn't find anything. No footprints, no signs of forced entry. Nothing. But when I went to the living room the next morning, I saw it. A single, faint handprint on the glass, too long and thin to be human. I work for a small marketing agency, the kind of place where everyone wears multiple hats, and staying late is just part of the job. Our office is on the 11th floor of a high-rise downtown. It's nothing glamorous, fluorescent lights, gray carpets, cubicles, but it's quiet at night, almost too quiet. That Thursday, I stayed later than usual to finish up a campaign pitch. Everyone else had left by 8 p.m., but I didn't mind. I actually liked working alone. No distractions, just the hum of my computer and the occasional groan of the ancient HVAC system. It was around 10:30 p.m. when I heard the first sound, a soft, muffled thud coming from somewhere down the hall. I paused, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. It wasn't unusual for the building's night cleaning crew to come around at this time, so I shrugged it off and kept working. But then I heard it again. This time, it was louder, closer, like something heavy had fallen onto the carpet. I stood up and peered over the top of my cubicle. The office was dark except for the light above my desk. The cleaning crew usually worked with their carts, and I didn't hear the telltale squeak of wheels. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small in the empty space. No answer. I sat back down, trying to shake off the creeping unease. I told myself it was nothing, probably just the HVAC acting up again. But then, just as I was about to start typing, I heard another sound. This time, it was unmistakable. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps coming down the hallway toward my desk. My stomach tightened. "Hey, is someone there?" I called out louder this time. The footsteps stopped. My heart was pounding now, but I forced myself to stand up and walk toward the hallway. I grabbed my phone, the flashlight app cutting through the darkness. "Hello?" I said again, my voice shaking slightly. The hallway was empty. I checked the other cubicles, the break room, even the supply closet. No one, just silence. I went back to my desk, telling myself I was imagining things. Maybe I'd just been working too long and needed to go home. But when I sat down again, my computer screen had changed. The pitch deck I'd been working on was gone. In its place was a single word, typed in bold letters across a blank document. "Leave." I froze, staring at the screen. My first thought was that someone was playing a prank. Maybe one of my coworkers had stuck around after all. But how would they have gotten access to my computer? My desk had been locked the entire time I was away. "Very funny," I muttered, more to myself than anyone else. I closed the document and shut down my computer. I decided I'd had enough for the night. The office felt oppressive as I packed up my bag, the silence pressing down on me. As I walked toward the elevator, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. My reflection in the dark office windows looked strange, distorted, almost like it wasn't following my movements exactly. I pressed the elevator button, my finger trembling slightly. The doors opened with a chime, and I stepped inside, grateful to finally be leaving. The doors slid shut, and I pressed the button for the lobby. The elevator started moving, the faint hum of the motor a small comfort. But then, halfway down, it stopped. The lights flickered, plunging the elevator into near darkness. My stomach sank. I jabbed the door open button, then the emergency button, but nothing happened. The elevator stayed still, and then I heard it, a faint, rhythmic tapping. It was coming from the ceiling. My eyes shot up, and I felt my blood run cold. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, as if someone, or something, was up there, trying to get in. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. The tapping stopped. For a moment, everything was still. Then, with a loud groan, the elevator shuddered, and the lights came back on. The floor indicator read B. Basement. I hadn't pressed the basement button. I hadn't even realized the elevator could go there. It was supposed to be locked off. My breath came in shallow gasps as the doors slid open. The basement was dark, the only light coming from the elevator itself. The air was damp and cold, carrying a faint, metallic smell. I stayed in the elevator, my hand hovering over the door close button. I didn't want to step out, but something caught my eye. A shape, barely visible in the shadows. It was crouched at the far end of the basement, its limbs unnaturally long and thin. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its eyes on me. My entire body screamed at me to close the doors, to get out of there, but I was frozen. The thing moved, not like a person, but like a spider, its body contorting as it skittered toward the elevator. I snapped out of my paralysis and slammed the door close button, my heart pounding as the doors inched shut. Just before they closed completely, I saw it. Its face, or what should have been a face, was pressed against the gap in the doors. Pale, featureless, and smooth, except for a single slit where its mouth should have been. It smiled. The elevator jerked upward, and I collapsed against the wall, my legs trembling. I didn't stop shaking until I reached the lobby. When the doors opened, the familiar hum of fluorescent lights and the sound of traffic outside felt like salvation. I ran to my car and drove home, refusing to look in the rearview mirror the entire way. The next day, I told my boss I couldn't stay late anymore. I didn't mention why. What was I supposed to say? But I made a point to leave the office before sunset every single day. Still, sometimes, when I'm alone in a quiet room, I think I hear it again. The faint tapping on the ceiling. My apartment is nothing special, a one-bedroom on the outskirts of the city. It's small, but it's home. I've always liked how quiet the building is, especially at night. It's one of those places where you rarely see your neighbors, and people mostly keep to themselves. I thought it was perfect. It started on a Thursday. I'd gotten home late after meeting some friends for drinks and was halfway through brushing my teeth when I noticed it. My bathroom door was open, just a crack, enough for me to see into the dark hallway beyond. At first, I thought nothing of it. I always left the door open a little, so the steam from the shower wouldn't fog up the mirror. But as I leaned over the sink, I felt it, a presence. It wasn't anything tangible, just the distinct feeling that someone was standing on the other side of the door, watching me. I straightened up and stared at the crack in the door. "Hello?" I called out, my voice wavering slightly. "Nothing." I grabbed my phone from the counter and turned on the flashlight. Shining it through the gap, I could see the hallway was empty. No one was there. I felt a little stupid for even being nervous. It was late, I was tired, and my mind was probably playing tricks on me. But when I walked into the hallway to turn off the lights, I froze. At the far end of the hall, near the front door, was a shadow. It was faint, just a darker patch of black against the dim light coming through the blinds. But it was shaped like a person. I stared at it, waiting for my eyes to adjust. Maybe it was a coat hanging on the rack or a trick of the light. But as I stepped closer, the shadow shifted, just slightly, like it had turned toward me. My breath caught in my throat. I flipped on the hallway light, and the shadow was gone. The coat rack was empty, the door locked, everything exactly as it should be. I laughed nervously, shaking my head at my own paranoia. "You've been watching too many horror movies," I muttered to myself. I turned off the lights and went to bed, but I didn't sleep well. The next few nights were uneventful. I convinced myself that what I'd seen, or thought I'd seen, was just a trick of the light. But then things started happening. Small things at first. The kind of things you could explain away if you really wanted to. One night, I came home to find my keys on the kitchen counter instead of the hook by the door where I always left them. Another time, the bathroom faucet was running, even though I was sure I'd turned it off that morning. Once, I woke up to find the hallway light on, even though I distinctly remembered turning it off before bed. Then came the whispers. It was late, maybe 2 or 3 a.m., and I'd woken up thirsty. As I got up to grab a glass of water, I heard it, a faint, low murmur coming from the hallway. It wasn't clear enough to make out words, just a soft, rhythmic sound, like someone speaking under their breath. I froze, my hand on the bedroom door handle. My first thought was that it was a neighbor. The walls in my building were thin, and I could sometimes hear the guy next door arguing with his girlfriend. But this was different. It wasn't muffled like it was coming through a wall. It was close. Too close. I opened the door just a crack, enough to see into the hallway. It was dark, but I could still make out the faint outline of the furniture. Nothing seemed out of place. The whispers stopped. I stood there for a moment, listening, my heart pounding. Then I stepped into the hallway, turning on the light. It flickered for a second before coming on fully. The hallway was empty. As I walked toward the kitchen, I felt it again, that presence. like someone was standing just behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing there, just empty air. I grabbed a glass of water and hurried back to my room, locking the door behind me. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The last night I spent in that apartment is still burned into my memory. It was a Sunday. I'd been out all day, trying to distract myself from the growing unease I felt at home. When I got back, it was already dark. I walked into the apartment and immediately felt it, the heaviness in the air, like the atmosphere had changed. It smelled faintly metallic, like old pennies. I turned on every light in the apartment, refusing to sit in the dark. I tried to distract myself with TV, but the feeling didn't go away. It was like something was watching me, waiting. At around midnight, I heard it, the creak of the floorboards in the hallway. My stomach dropped. I muted the TV, straining to listen. The creaking came again, louder this time, closer. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. My hands were shaking as I walked toward the hallway. The floor was empty, but as I swung the light toward the front door, my heart stopped. The shadow was back. It stood in the same spot as before, near the door. But this time, it was sharper, more defined. I could see the outline of arms, legs, even a head. It didn't move, but I could feel its gaze boring into me. I stumbled backward, dropping my phone. The flashlight spun across the floor, throwing wild beams of light across the walls. When I picked it up and shined it back toward the door, the shadow was gone. That was it. I grabbed my keys and bolted. I didn't care that it was the middle of the night. I drove to a friend's place and stayed there for a week. When I finally went back to the apartment, it was only to pack up and move out. I still don't know what it was. I've tried to rationalize it. Stress, exhaustion, even hallucinations. But deep down, I know that shadow wasn't in my head. Sometimes, I think about the new tenant who moved in after me. I wonder if they've seen it too, or if they will.